Excellent guest. Ian Lesser is a distinguished fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. So you also served on the advisory boards of the NATO Defence College Foundation. And also, I'm pleased to say, Leslie Wingemuri, director of the US and Americas program at Chatham House, joins us live. To both of you, welcome. Leslie, let's just start with you. The idea that the audience, once listening to J.D. Vance, were stunned. He was educating them on what they should be doing rather than outlining the US plan for peace for Ukraine. What's your reaction to what we've been witnessing over the past few days?
I think for this conference, for the Munich Security Conference, which is, as you've just said, and as we've heard, it's all about the transatlantic unity, about security, about the US and Europe generally really coming together. It was stunning, but I have to say, for those of us, I'm currently in the US, that have been listening to this administration incessantly around the clock, nothing that was said is actually surprising. In fact, what J.D. Vance, the vice president, appears to have done is very much to be taking President Trump's domestic agenda and sharing it with Europe. Freedom of speech, space for the far right, something that is beyond the convention, the norm, which is quite frankly horrifying to many in Germany as they approach their own election. But here in the United States, the push on opening up that space, the anti-woke attacks, getting rid of DEI, the Project 2025 moves to really change the executive branch. This is really Trump's America sort of being introduced to the Europeans at a time and in a place where this is not usually the conversation. Inevitably, it comes across as patronizing, but more importantly, as missing the mark for what is a profound moment for Europe at a time when it looks like President Trump is going to move to negotiate an end to a war without taking interests into account, without even necessarily having them with a voice at the table. And even though this has been, quite frankly, a long time coming, it's been well telegraphed, it's not surprising, but it is still shocking, and especially for this audience at this point in time, in this context, and preceded by just a huge amount of chaos and uncertainty as to exactly what is on the table and what is off the table. We saw the Secretary of Defense backtrack, at first say that NATO membership was off the table, that U.S. troops would not participate on the ground in securing a border. And then we saw that backtrack. So lots of uncertainty, a lot of chaos, and very mixed messages from the various U.S. participants, including the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, not striking the same chord and not saying exactly the same thing as the vice president.
Yeah, they did seem to feel that they weren't on the same briefing call when that conversation was being had when earlier on today at Munich. You're saying not surprising, but still shocking. Ian, it just, when it comes to, with your the hat on as the former working on the advisory board of the NATO Defence College Foundation, when you've got Pete Hegseth potentially ruling out Ukraine's membership to NATO, and as we heard there, Leslie, he railed back on that a bit. But when he is removing that, what does that mean for Ukraine's sovereignty if he takes their ability to make that decision for themselves away from them, even before we're even talking about a potential peace plan between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think this is only going to reinforce existing concerns, above all in Ukraine, but also across Europe, that somehow, as much as everyone would like at least a ceasefire in this conflict, that there's going to be a deal done above Ukraine's head, and indeed above European heads. And I think there is a strong flavor of that. There was very little detail, but I think it's pretty clear. The administration has been very clear. The Secretary of Defense was pretty clear about this, that there's no going back, in their view, to the territorial realities before 2014, and that there's very little prospect, maybe no prospect, of Ukraine joining NATO. I think many in Europe probably understand that and may share the view, but it's a shocking thing for many here to hear. On other fronts, I think, it was quite surprising. On the burden sharing front, that Europe should pay more and do more on defense, this would have been a normal sort of message to deliver. There was actually very little of that. Pete Hegseth talked a bit about that in Brussels. That's not so surprising, whether it's 5% or 3% or whatever the number is. Europe is prepared to do more. And frankly, I think the whole style and tone of this discourse is going to drive Europe quite quickly to do more. But it wasn't about that. And, as Leslie said, it was a lot about kind of projecting the ideology of the Trump administration to a European audience. And probably, frankly, the speech that the vice president gave was aimed largely at a domestic audience in the United States. And some of the reactions I think that we've seen in Europe have also been aimed at audiences here with key elections coming up.
And again, you get that sense of shock that it was in the room, especially when J.D. Vance was speaking. But just when it comes to, Leslie, the messaging then, is Donald Trump's administration, do they just simply not care about what Europe is thinking? We know that they've been talking for a long time about the need for NATO countries to pay up more. Are they just so not interested in what is happening in Europe that it almost doesn't matter?
Look, I think it matters a huge amount. I think it even matters to President Trump and this administration, even though it wouldn't appear that way. But in some ways, I mean, the very unusual thing about the U.S. engagement at Munich is that it appears that what the United States administration is trying to do is to bargain hard. The art of the deal is being played against Europe, not against Russia. And this is what is so shocking, the sort of threat to remove some really important bargaining tools, questions about NATO membership, questions about U.S. security assurances. It is being used against Europe as a tool to force Europe's hand on spending more, working more collectively, as opposed to what we normally see at Munich, which is the U.S. and Europe coming together in the face of what they jointly see to be the dominant threats in the international system, whether it is from Russia, at times it's been China, but the table seems to have been turned, and it raises, if you go back to Ursula von der Leyen's speech, the president of the European Commission, she made a very powerful argument saying that defending Ukraine and pushing back and deterring Russia is critical for the U.S. interest, not only for Europe's, because the rest of the world will be reading this to see how serious the U.S. is about deterring other authoritarian leaders. It's just not clear, though, that the United States and the Europeans share that same basic belief. And therein, I think, lies the problem. Donald Trump and his administration have traveled to Munich to warn the Europeans and not to warn Vladimir Putin.
When you put it like that, it just sounds so stark, doesn't it? Ian, I guess Europe is now really going to, think about what they do next. They're going to have to really think about going it alone.
Well, I think Europeans, that's a broad statement. Obviously, there are places in Europe where President Trump has a better reception than others. But, at the European level, at the NATO level, there is such anxiety to begin with. Some of it is about security and defense. Some of it is about trade and the ability of this administration to link these things together in ways that you've never really heard before. Saying that Vice President actually some time ago said that the United States is going to look at the treatment of American companies in Europe, and then we're going to think about what we would do in terms of European security, actually linking those things together. I think that's quite shocking. The other part of this, of course, is that as much as Europe may want to spend more and do more in defense, it's very hard to do. The public's really going to be willing to do that? Does Europe have the strategic culture to use force in the way that the United States has? Maybe, maybe not. It's not clear. And whatever it is, it's going to take a very long time. And I think, with some of these speeches that we've already heard and other comments that have been made this week, we get a sense that this is an administration in a hurry to present these points in Europe, and it's not going to be well received.
A fascinating insights, and really good to get both of your analysis on what we've been seeing over the past few days. Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund, thank you so much. And also Leslie Vinjamuri from Chatham House. Really appreciate both of your expertise on this historical events that we've been witnessing over the past few